Good evening, residents of Santa Cruz County. Thank you for being here for another episode and show of Let's Talk with Lou. Community TV is an outreach to you, our listening audience. And as usual, we have a great guest tonight. I'm always very pleased and amazed with the folks that chime in with what they're doing and how they're contributing to our community. And we've never had a time where we didn't have people that had this great love for what they do in this community, and tonight's no different. We've got somebody that's with us this evening that is running for U.S. Congressperson. She's a candidate. She's going to be running for the 20th district, and that, of course, is Sam Farr's district. And she comes all the way from Pacific Grove. And I'd like to, first of all, just welcome her, and that's Casey, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you being coming all the way down. We've got a lot of traffic, and I know it's been quite a drive. I'm sure it must have taken you an hour.
It did, a little over an hour. And funny enough that you say that, because transportation always comes up when I'm talking, especially to residents of Santa Cruz.
Yes, yes. I want to talk about Casey Lucius's bio. She's got a good one. She has recently resigned as a professor of national security decision making at the U.S. Naval War College in order to run for U.S. House of Representatives. Prior to teaching at the War College, she taught at the Naval Postgraduate School, where she has designed courses on U.S. foreign policy and Asian studies. And she's also taught courses on culture and U.S.-Vietnam relationships at the Hanoi University of International Studies. She is prior to that, her academic work, Lucius has worked as an operations assistant to the ambassador to the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, and she also spent nearly a decade in service at the Naval Intelligence as a Naval Intelligence officer, which included a staff tour of Pacific Fleet headquarters in Hawaii and a tour on the USS John Stennis aircraft carrier. In 2003, Lucius worked as an intelligence liaison between the U.S. Navy and navies of Thailand, South Korea, Singapore, and Japan. She also worked as a legislative aide in the Ohio House of Representatives. Academically, second to none. She's brilliant. I've seen some of her other interviews in other venues, and she is very articulate. And I think tonight you're going to be you're going to have a nice, a pleasant surprise with what she's got to talk about. Some of her goals and ambitions if she gets elected to this position. And first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what a U.S. Congressperson does and how they're elected and the things that they do. Having earned her PhD in political science from the University of Hawaii in 2007 and a master's degree in national security affairs from the Naval Postgraduate School in 2002, she brings a lot to the table. She's a very bright lady. She is also a graduate of the Naval War College at Ashland University and has conducted research in China and Vietnam and has published a book on Vietnam's political system. Lucius serves on the Pacific Grove City Council as well as several other regional boards, and she is married to Lieutenant Colonel Robert Lucius, United States Marine Corps retired. And they have one 6-year-old son, Bobby, who I understand lost his first tooth tonight.
That's right, that's right. And I missed it. It was right when I walked out the door to come here. Okay. My husband followed up with a photo on the cell phone showing me the big hole, and he lost his first tooth, and he's very excited. The problem is he thinks that the tooth fairy leaves $20. Ah. Yes. I told him that's not true. The tooth fairy might leave $1 or $2. So I have to bring down the expectations with the tooth fairy, especially because this is the first tooth, right? So I don't want to set a precedent.
Very good.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. That's a great age where they start doing those fun things, and everything's that's wonderful. I've got some grandchildren. We're doing that with a 2-year-old, and then one more coming. But the firsts are so fun.
Yes.
So.
Well, he is. He's full of energy, and in fact, this afternoon our entire living room floor was covered with blocks and Legos and railroad tracks as he's like building a city.
Yes.
And then I can't move the city.
Yep.
So it stays there throughout the weekend and we have to walk around it, and we have to accommodate the 6-year-old. So that's our weekends now.
Got that. Thank you for that. That's sharing that. That's fun. Couple things I wanted to kind of set a good foundation for this evening. Is first of all, with your background, you have a wonderful background, and certainly you've served our nation. You're a veteran yourself.
Yes.
Of course, as your husband is. But let's talk a little bit about what a U.S. Congressperson does, and probably Civics 101. We all had that at one time, but it's been a lot of years for me. If you could talk about the responsibilities of a U.S. Congressperson, what some of the ambitions and drives that you have if elected to that position, how will you accomplish those things, and just in general, I mean, where's your heart at with this? For sure, with the busy schedule that you have, and the opportunities I'm sure that you've had to take the time to run a campaign, I'm sure is all time consuming. But you're here tonight, and obviously you're serious about this, very serious about it. I can tell that, and some other things that I've seen on the internet, you would do a very good job of communicating those things. So if we can go through that maybe one more time, and I apologize for the 101 thing, but some of us, I remember some of it, but not all of it. But tell us what a U.S. Congressperson actually does.
Sure. Well, this is particularly important because obviously there are multiple responsibilities for our representative, and one, of course, is being present in the district and making sure that that individual understands the challenges that exist in this district. But then the majority of the time is really in Washington, D.C., and really putting forward legislation that is going to protect this district and advance the interests of the district. And doing that is where you get into the Civics 101 and becomes a much more complicated process. I mean, we probably all remember watching, how a bill becomes a law when we were kids. But it actually is quite a lengthy process, and it starts with building a coalition and going to Washington, D.C., and really right away developing relationships with Republicans, Democrats, independents, and with the administration. And this is where it's important, actually, before you even get to writing legislation or advocating for your district or trying to bring money to the district, you have to build those coalitions, and you really have to bring a concept, a vision forward for legislation.
How many let me interrupt.
Yes.
How many Congress people do we have that in fact are in California, and how many are there, let's say, nationally? What kind of numbers are we looking at?
Yeah, so in the House of Representatives, we have 435, and we have 53 in the state of California. And this particular district includes Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, San Benito County, and part of Santa Clara County.
What part of Santa Clara, out of curiosity?
Just the southern part of Gilroy.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So really it's important, I mean, because this district is so diverse and it covers such a large geographic area, there are a lot of challenges, and we want somebody to be able to go to Washington and really fight for the needs of this district. But it has to start with building those partnerships, then making sure that you have the administration, the president, on board, because there's no sense in going through that legislative process if the president's never going to sign your bill, right? So you build the coalition, you make sure you have support from the administration, and then you have to work through the process of actually writing the legislation, making sure it gets through subcommittee and full committees, and then making sure that it gets on the agenda for a floor vote. And this is where you have to work with the leadership of the majority party. And as you probably know, I'm running as a Republican, and right now Republicans are in the majority. So this is where I will have an advantage in Washington, because luckily the majority party is able to set the agenda for the subcommittees, for the hearings, and then for the votes on the floor of the House. At the same time that all of that is happening, you also have this parallel process going on in the Senate. So once your bill is approved in the House, it goes over to the Senate side, and you have to have that same kind of support, the same coalition. You have to go through the same hearings and the same subcommittees and make sure it gets passed through the Senate. And then, of course, it goes to the president's desk for signature. And that's when you get the money to your district. So there's a lot of steps and a really detailed process that your member has to be aware of and know how to work within that process to really get the best legislation for this district.
We're going to talk a little bit more, probably a little bit in a few minutes, a little bit later, about some of the particular issues that are indicative of this community that we live in. And obviously, you know, it's most of the Monterey Bay area, well, actually all of it, and some of the inland parts of the area as well. And, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about maybe housing and some issues that are national issues, not specific to, let's say, the state, because this is a national position that you're in, and you're back.
Right.
That's why you're back and forth to D.C., obviously.
Right.
In doing that, well, let me ask you a first up-front question. The first one I thought of: would you stay in PG or Pacific Grove, or would you move to back to D.C., or do you go back and forth? What would your goal be?
Yeah, my goal would be to stay in Pacific Grove. I mean, we love the Central Coast. It's a blessing for us to be able to live here. We bought our first home in Pacific Grove, and our son is in public school in Pacific Grove. So we would definitely stay in PG and stay on the Central Coast, and then I would travel back and forth to Washington.
How often does that occur? Is it like a 4 or 5 day week? I'm not sure how that. Are you back and forth, and then you're out of, you know, session, and then you're home for a while? What's the timing on that?
Well, the members meet about 110 days a year. So you figure it's about 1/3 of the year that I would have to spend in Washington, and then 2/3 here in the district, making sure I'm available to meet with constituents and attend local events, and of course, here with my family.
Okay, very good. In doing the scheduling, does your husband work here or in D.C.?
So my husband actually works for the Humane Society of the United States, which is in Washington, D.C., but he's fortunate enough to be able to work from home. He travels quite a bit to Asia, but he does work from home, so we have, you know, great flexibility there.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of that working for you, it seems like it would work quite well.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about some things that are indicative of our community, and of course, I would say your district. What would, let's say, if you were to, you know, name 4 of the top priorities that you might have, and maybe from the most important to, you know, the 4th least important, not important, but just, you know, one out of the 4, or the 4th least. If you could give us, let's say, the most important thing, just in general, that you would like to address, and then we'll talk about some challenges that you might have too. And some things that, let's say, you've accomplished in the past, because you are an elected official already, so you've got some of those, you know, how things work. And certainly, Sam Farr was a tremendous legislator, and he's done a great job for our community. Big shoes to fill, but I think, you know, that certainly you've got the skill set, it sounds like, to do the thing that needs to get done. But let's talk about the first priority that you would have if being elected to this position.
Yes, well, I'm glad you asked, and I will just back up for 1 second and say that I too really admire Congressman Farr, and in fact, he and I have many commonalities in terms of he's a big animal advocate, as am I, and he's also a big advocate for the environment and the Monterey Bay, as am I. And so I have had, you know, I've been fortunate enough to be able to talk to him about those things, and also to let him know that I would love to be able to carry on some of the initiatives that he has started in those areas. Obviously, immigration is, I think, one of the most important issues for this district, and it's also a national issue. It's something that the Congress is wrestling with now and has been for years, and it's particularly important for this district because of our agricultural industry, because of our tourism industry, and we rely heavily on immigrant labor for our workforce. So I would want to really tackle immigration reform. And then some of the other issues that I feel very passionate about, obviously national security, because that's my background. And we do have some serious threats from other countries that are threatening the US homeland. But it also comes back to public safety. I mean, I see security kind of holistically as not just protection of the homeland, but also making sure that there's a coordinated effort at all levels of government to make sure that our police are properly trained and equipped so that we have the safest neighborhoods. So that's important. Affordable housing is something that I feel passionate about because of my own background and growing up in affordable low-income housing. And then water. I would say it's certainly not at the bottom of the list. It's probably closer to the top of the list, depending on the industry that you work for. And even though we've gotten rain, it's still an issue that we have to address because the drought has really, really impacted this region and impacted our economy.
So, and for the most part, you're probably like Santa Cruz proper. I understand from some other legislators that I've talked to here that your whole district is self-contained. We don't get any water from outside of the area, so we go into our wells, and if we deplete them, then we're out. Or if we have saltwater intrusion, and so all those things.
That's right.
How do you distinguish, let's say, well, we'll talk about water for a moment, between that being a national issue and, let's say, a state and regional issue? And where do you come into play, let's say, as a U.S. Congressperson, to propose legislation that would allow us to have, less challenges there, as you see the issue on a national basis, but then bringing it back to the geographical area that we're in, obviously?
Right. Well, it really is a local issue. I mean, water, making sure that we have the right water sources, that we have accessibility to healthy and affordable water, really is a local issue. But what happens is we have so many state and federal agencies that become part of the permitting process that they actually hinder the local water districts and the local water agencies from making progress. We've seen that with the Salinas River, with basic channel maintenance. We've seen it with building new water infrastructure, actually in all 3 counties where we do rely on our own independent sources of water. And it's actually the federal agencies in many cases that put the hold on some of the permits that we need and make the permits so expensive. So while it would probably be ideal to have local solutions to our local water needs, the fact is the federal government plays a role because there are so many federal agencies involved in the permitting process. And there actually was legislation that was passed through the House last year. It was called the Western Water Supply Act. And it addressed this issue of when we are in a severe drought, we need to have a streamlined permitting process. So in other words, we have CEQA and the Coastal Commission and NOAA, we have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have the EPA and the Endangered Species Act. There are a number of agencies, state and federal government agencies, that get involved in local water. And basically this legislation that was put forward by Representative Valadeo from the Central Valley said during times of severe drought, we have to have a mechanism to streamline that process and get some of those agencies out of the way. Not all the time, but during severe drought. So that did pass the House. It has not yet passed the Senate, but I'm certainly hopeful that it will because I think that will really lighten the load and lighten the burden for our local water districts. What
do you see in terms of the future for water? Not that nobody's got a crystal ball on this, but certainly you might have an opinion about that. Would you guess that we might be out of it, or we're going to be in this for a while, even with El Nino? I've heard all kinds of different, opinions about it, but coming from a federal legislator position, are you in tune with what's going on with that right now? I mean, actually, water is a worldwide issue. There's a prediction that by 2025, 8.1 million people will be living in areas of absolute water scarcity where they have no water. So this is a worldwide problem that is getting worse. It's not getting better. And we've just seen a little bit of it here in California. But I think without a state emergency drought plan and then without federal legislation to support that plan, we will have another drought. This is California's 10th drought. So even if we're lucky enough to have heavy rains that kind of catch us back up to where we were 5 years ago, we're then not prepared for the next drought. There will be an 11th drought. So how do we remedy the issues that we're having right now so that we can be proactive instead of reactive during the next drought? So I kind of see this problem getting worse before it gets better. Okay, good. This kind of just morphs right into the environment, it seems like. Give us some perspective on what your take with what's happening in the environment, and certainly, we live in one of the most beautiful areas in the world. And I think that most legislators would like to keep it that way, and certainly some of our locals feel that way. We've had all the county supervisors on this show, and our state senator and state assemblyman, and it seems like everybody's definitely doing that same kind of thing. How might you see yourself in terms of being challenged with keeping what Sam has done and perpetuating the protection that we have in place right now? And again, what kind of challenges would you guess you'll run into if elected to this position?
Well, the environment obviously is so important to the residents who live on the Central Coast, because this is an amazingly beautiful area, probably the most beautiful area in the world, certainly in this country, but maybe even in the world. And we do want to protect our environment and protect the coastline. And one of the things that I'm proud of on the PG City Council is that we were the first city in the county to pass the plastic bag ban, which protects our oceans, obviously. And I think that's particularly important for both Monterey County and Santa Cruz County, because we rely heavily on tourism, that we want to have a beautiful bay, we want to have a beautiful environment for people to visit. And it also is an economic opportunity in terms of promoting ecotourism. So these are areas where we can really excel and also benefit from our environment. And at the federal level, there's been a real push for climate change legislation. You may remember the Paris climate talks, which happened several months ago, and I think there were 190 countries that got on board to reduce CO2 emissions. And I think those are great steps in the right direction, but I also feel like it misses the mark. And here's how. There's actually methane gas and nitrous oxide, which warm the atmosphere faster than CO2 emissions. So all of the current federal legislation and all of the current Obama climate change initiatives focus on reducing CO2 emissions. And we spend about $38 billion a year reducing CO2 emissions. And we don't do anything about the methane or the nitrous oxide emissions, which is interesting, right? Because the industry that contributes the most to methane and nitrous oxide emissions is factory farming. So yes, so that's one of the challenges. So that gets to the challenges, because we have these very influential industries throughout the country. They lobby in Washington, D.C., and they, in many times, set the agenda for legislation, for what's included or not included in a piece of legislation. So I think if we're really serious about climate change, if we're really serious about protecting our environment, and that also goes into healthcare as well, and poverty, worldwide poverty. I mean, there are lots of linkages here, but I think if we're really serious about protecting the environment, we have to look at our own diets, we have to look at our own lifestyles, and we also have to look at including factory farming in that climate change legislation.
How might you approach that in terms of it being a fairly large challenge? Because certainly we're an ag community.
Yes.
Monterey, certainly Salinas Valley is huge with ag. Some of the best wine comes out of Salinas Valley now as well. Carmel Valley, of course. And we've got some vineyards in this area that are getting some attention. But how would you guess that you might approach that to change things, or at least begin change from how they've been going, how things have been, going in the direction that they have been going?
Well, I think this is the perfect setting to push that kind of legislation. I mean, it's difficult for other reasons, but because we are in the salad bowl of America, this is the perfect place to say, okay, America, you need to be eating more fruits and vegetables, right? Because first of all, it's better for the environment, it's better for animals, it's better in terms of the crops that we grow, which right now go to feed animals, could be used for worldwide poverty reduction. It could also be used for improving healthcare and reducing some of the preventative diseases and reducing healthcare costs. So I actually think right now we can promote our fruit and our vegetable and our agricultural industry, and it has all of these other positive impacts, which comes back to also successfully accommodate and advantage our own ag industry.
Very good, very good. Let's talk a little bit about maybe a little bit more detail in protecting the environment that we do have in terms of our clean waters, on the bay, and then just clean overall environment. We've got some issues that have been happening in Santa Cruz in particular, which was the noise from the jets. I like it.
Yes.
I fly small planes, so I dig it. I learned in Salinas, in fact. But the kinds of issues that are indicative of our area are not indicative of other areas. I mean, our air quality is very high here. We'll talk in a moment about housing, at least the Santa Cruz area, second in the nation in terms of income compared to the housing costs. I know when I came to go to college here in the 70s, my wife and I were fortunate enough to buy a home, but I'm not sure I could do that now.
Right.
I've got 3 children, and one's a medical practitioner and does really well, and she's renting. Another one, my son-in-law is a very, very successful engineer, and they're renting. And my third one is kind of different because he's buying, but he's extremely successful, ambitious, and driven, and so that's kind of the exception to the rule. I probably would have, if I had 3 above average children, 3 that are renting right now. I'm concerned about that for sure because I'd like to see my kids be able to live here, with home ownership, and my grandkids as well. Certainly, those are challenges I think that all us parents that have lived here for a lot of years are concerned with. I had a friend say to me recently that successful civil engineer, he says, my kids can't live here, so for me to get time with my grandkids, he goes, we do a cruise once a year. And I thought, I get to see my little 2-year-old about once to twice a week, fortunately. But quite frankly, when my son had graduated from college, he said, Dad, he goes, I could probably buy a beautiful place out in Austin, Texas, as compared to buying a condo in Santa Cruz for what I could afford coming out of Stanford Law School. He was a graduate from the business and law school. And I thought, wow, what is this world coming to? He can hardly afford to come back. And I mentioned on my last show that I'm on some medical boards, and our biggest issues on those boards is to keep doctors here, retain our doctors, but then also bring in the young recruits. The kids coming out of school, medical school, are getting paid well, but they also have high student debt. Unless they have a spouse working, or they have a family member that, let's say, passed on some property to them. So there's some challenges. Let's talk about some housing issues, and I understand too from a friend of mine that is head of housing at the university, or I guess he's the second in charge. He said we're short of housing, and we will be for some time to come. If you were to get into the office, how would you propose those challenges with housing in general, in both counties? And certainly you've got more than just this county, but I'm thinking in Santa Cruz in particular. By the way, the reason I kind of gravitate is because this show only stays in Santa Cruz. It is streamed, you can get it on YouTube, but for the most part, community TV just is in Santa Cruz County. So I'm addressing those issues. But how might you, with that challenge ahead of you, do something that would be proactive for the issues in terms of housing, in particular, I guess, in Santa Cruz County?
Right. Well, first of all, congratulations on raising 3 successful children. I'm hoping I can raise 1 successful child. Yeah. So congratulations. And I have to tell you, I have the same concern. And I share this with people that, I look at our economy, I look at the housing issues and the cost of college, and I think, I hope that my son can afford to go to college. I hope that he can get a job in this area and afford to buy a home in this area. But I don't know if that will happen. And I mentioned earlier, this is an issue that I feel passionate about because I actually grew up in Ohio. And my mom was a secretary. My stepdad worked in a steel factory. And we grew up living in apartments. And when the rent was raised, we moved to another apartment. And I actually never lived in a house until my husband and I bought our house in Pacific Grove. And even to this day, my mom has never owned a home. So I grew up learning about rent and renting, and that was kind of what was what we could afford to do and what was expected. And I remember when we did move to Pacific Grove, my husband and I were here in 2000 as students, so obviously we rented then. When we came back in 2008, the economy had crashed and housing prices were low, and we were able to afford a house. If we were trying to do that today, we could never afford to buy a home. Sure. So for us, we kind of got lucky. It was a matter of timing, but it shouldn't be a matter of timing for people to be able to experience the American dream and buy a home. So when I think about affordable housing, I think there are really two ways we can look at this. I mean, one is we can talk about federal funding for HUD housing, for Section 8 housing, and building more affordable units.
Let's talk about that for a moment.
Yes.
HUD and Section 8, for those of our listening audience that aren't familiar with that, those are national programs?
Yes, so we get federal funding, and there are also, at least in this district, in all 3 counties, there are also local and state regulations which mandate what percentage of your housing stock should be low-income housing. And then a lot of times the builders are subsidized through federal funding. So there are some initiatives there in place for developers to develop low-income housing. But there is federal funding for low-income housing, and that gets funneled from the federal government to the state to the local level. But I also think it's important to take a parallel approach, which is one toward home ownership. And this speaks to your kids and being able to buy a home and making sure that people have those opportunities. And there have been recommendations and proposals put forward in terms of the federal government working with state and local governments to establish trust funds, and then those trust funds could be used for home ownership purposes. And for example, they could be used to waive developer fees or assist with closing costs or whatever the case may be. But essentially, you really empower the states and local governments to meet the needs of their local residents, depending on the cost of living and so forth. But then you have the federal policies that support and promote home ownership. And that's what I would like to see more of. I mean, it's important to build low-income housing. We absolutely need to do that. We need to make sure that kids coming out of college can live here, that our roads aren't congested with people commuting.
Yes.
But ultimately, we don't want people to be renters forever. We want them to experience the joy and the excitement of home ownership. Because the thing about home ownership is you become a stakeholder in your community, right? I mean, it's just different than renting. Not that renters don't care about their community, but it's just very different because all of a sudden you have a stake in what happens on your street and what happens in your neighborhood, the quality of your school districts. It's just a different level of care and concern. And I think that's something that we want to promote.
In terms of, I agree with you thoroughly. Pride of ownership is huge. Just having a stake in the community, and you can always tell the difference. If you're going through a neighborhood and you've got 20 houses in a subdivision, and the one that's the rental, because it's usually not quite kept up as well for different reasons. Rents are crazy around here. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 34 to 36. Sometimes $3,800 a month. It's something that I think certainly as a university community, everybody's concerned with. I am always touting and bragging on, I think, the jewel of Santa Cruz, and that's Cabrillo College, as well as UCSC. Some of the best social scientists come out of UCSC. Now we have the Baskin School of Engineering. Cabrillo College, as I've mentioned before, is the top 1% of colleges academically in their allied health, and they draw people from all over the country to go to their hygiene program, their nursing program, and their radiology departments, and they come out making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, decent income, but it won't buy a house in Santa Cruz County. So we lose some of our prime, I think, wonderful young people that have, found themselves here like I did in the 70s, but can't stay here. That's a tragedy. It's tough. In my mind, it shouldn't necessarily be that way. Modest income, low income housing, I think the time has come. We have to do something about it. There was a meeting at the county supervisors this week, and they passed an initiative, a housing initiative, just encouraging modest and lower income housing. And I think it's time has come for those kinds of legislative acts to happen. If you were, again, in that position to be able to do some things, do you have any specific kinds of things? Would they be new, or would they be enhancing the stuff that's already in play, or a combination? I mean, how do you see that? I think you guys well, you guys, where you're at, Fort Ord and some of the housing issues are a little bit different necessarily than Santa Cruz County. I've got family that lives there, and my wife was, born and raised in Salinas, and 4 generations Salinas girl, rode rodeo and everything, and they still have their family ranch out there. But I wonder if they could afford to do that now, being that things are so high. And they built this house off Highway 68, just really neat place. But that's a lot of the stuff that happens with us in Santa Cruz. If we can pass our family, that legacy of property, that's great. But how do we keep those youngsters here? I mean, specifically, do you have any ideas that you might propose to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this, a lot of the issues that we talk about in this district, whether it be education funding for our roads, the affordable housing challenge, a lot of them all come back to the economy and making sure that we have a thriving economy. Because if the economy is in shape and doing well, all of those other things fall into place. And it really comes back to making sure that those college students who graduate can get jobs in this area, and high-paying jobs. We do have a heavy reliance on the tourism sector and the ag sector, but like you indicate, we also need to grow our health sector, and that's happening in Santa Cruz County and a little bit in Monterey County, but that's something that we can take advantage of. Also, our veterans, we have a lot of veterans. We have 35,000 veterans on the Central Coast who are professionals. They're reliable, they're loyal, they're hardworking, but they also have a hard time transitioning from the military into the civilian workforce. So making sure that they have the proper training to make that transition. So I think there are several different ways that you can approach this problem, but for me, it comes back to the economy. It comes back to making sure that businesses are thriving and that businesses can hire and pay appropriate wages, and really have a robust economy, because then that addresses so many of these other underlying challenges.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you would be able to address some of those issues by enhancing somehow, let's say, the small business owner, probably medium-sized business owners, to just be able to be more effective in what they're doing. And certainly we're in the middle of the economy kind of creeping back, but we're not back to where we were.
Right.
If you look at the housing costs, certainly you might not think that, but as I understand from somebody who works in Wall Street, that we're in a free fall right now in many of our high-tech companies. And so there's some challenges there. So okay, I see, yeah, that makes sense in terms of what you might do and how you might go about doing it. You mentioned something about earlier on about education, and how do you have any ideas in terms of what you might propose for education for, let's say, young students with student loans and things of that nature, or accessibility to education? I know in England, for example, in the European areas, countries is very, very different than what we have here. I would say we almost have compulsory education for college folks, and having been a professor, certainly you've got a heart for this. Do you have any ideas in terms of how that could be more approachable or done differently, or would you keep it the same as we've been doing it for students and student loans and things like that?
Well, I don't think we can keep it the same, because right now, as you indicated, we have we basically have a whole generation who believe that they have to have a college degree to get a job. They get a college degree and then they still can't get a job, and then they have tens of thousands, if not $100,000 in student loans to pay off. So it's a scary time for young people. And even though I was fortunate enough to be able to get a master's and a PhD, I'm one of those people who believe that not everyone should go to college. And what I hear when I talk to the directors of the various chambers of commerce is that one of the challenges for local businesses is having a trained workforce. Because even students who graduate from college may not have work experience. They may not have job training. They may not have the skills or the work ethic that these businesses are looking for. So I think investing in vocational training programs is one way to, promote education and job training, reduce the risk that students would have in terms of undertaking student loans, and kind of getting off of that dependency of college. We do have programs in place at the federal level. There's through the Department of Education, there's a program where if students graduate from college and they go to work for a nonprofit or they go to work for the federal government, then their student loans can be waived.
So let's talk about that for a moment. That's something that might interest some of our listeners, being again that we've got the two colleges, we might have some listeners that are students. How might their student loans go away if they were to go into a certain sector of the workforce? How does that work?
So I would urge them to go to the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education website, and they have a link there about student loans, and it speaks directly to this. And there are actually a number of programs available to either get student loans deferred, to get the loans waived or paid by future employers. And there are a number of requirements and stipulations. So that's why I say they need to take some time to look through that and really weed through the details. But the idea is that if individuals serve either working for the U.S. government or with a nonprofit, that there are programs where they can have their student loans waived.
For the federal, so what kind of, this is an interesting question, but what kind of jobs could be considered to be federal jobs? And I guess to distinguish that between, let's say, a state job and a county job, and what kind of workforce would we have here, let's say in Monterey, Santa Cruz counties that would be considered to be federal jobs?
Well, as you mentioned, we have a lot of social scientists, right, coming out of UC Santa Cruz. So those individuals may, go back to Washington, work for the State Department, for example, may work as civilians for the Department of Defense. I think there are a lot of opportunities there. Those health professionals coming out of Cabrillo College could work for the Department of Health and Human Services. So I think there are lots of opportunities where one can serve as a civilian with the federal government. The reason I was able to get a master's degree and a PhD was because of my service in the military. The military brought me to the Naval Postgraduate School, where I got a master's degree in national security affairs. And then I had also invested in the GI Bill. So I was able to use my GI Bill to pay for my PhD at the University of Hawaii. So without that service to our country, without spending 7 years on active duty, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to get a master's and a PhD. So I have to say, I'm not a fan of free college for everybody, because I do believe that it's important for individuals to have a stake and to make an investment in their own futures. And sometimes if young people don't pay for the things that they have, they don't appreciate it, right? I mean, you hear parents say that about their cars, right? If they pay for their car, they take care of it differently than if mom and dad are paying for it. So I do think there's an important investment on behalf of young people. But that investment can come in many forms. And in my case, it came in the form of serving in the military. But I think even after college, there are opportunities to serve with nonprofits or with the government.
So do they have to be just any nonprofit? Let's say a student coming out, or I guess maybe somebody that had graduated, they can work for a nonprofit, and then somehow it impacts their loans, or is it waived, or do you know the particulars about that? Because that's interesting. I'm on the board of some nonprofits. I wasn't aware of that, actually.
Right, and I believe it doesn't apply to local nonprofits. I think they have to be part of this federal program. So that's where I would advise any of the students or listeners to really go in and research that and make sure that that they're not being misled by working for a local agency that might not be part of the federal program.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Let's talk a little bit about, I know my dad used his GI Bill some years ago and two of my uncles, actually. Could you talk about a little bit about how that works now? Let's say if somebody were to go into the military, and how they would be reimbursed for their education, and how, I don't know if it's the same for you now, but how it would be, let's say, for a young woman or man going into the military now. How would that work, the GI Bill?
Yeah, so there are actually two different GI Bills. When I entered the military, I was given the opportunity to invest in the Montgomery GI Bill, which basically was like every month a certain amount of money came out of my paycheck. And then in return later, when I decided to use it, that money was there plus the government's contribution. So
also matching dollars.
Yes, except that it was more than matching, and I don't remember what the actual calculation was, but it was a great investment. And so exactly what happened was I paid for my tuition at the University of Hawaii, and then I was reimbursed through the GI Bill. My husband is actually using his GI Bill right now to get his PhD, but he has a different GI Bill, which is part of the war on terrorism. During that conflict, there was an initiative on the part of veterans to make sure that individuals who had been involved in Afghanistan and Iraq and fighting terrorism, that they had additional benefits through the GI Bill. So now there's kind of a different program, a different set of benefits that individuals can use. But generally it's the same, which is they're reimbursed for books and fees and tuition. And I think it's a great deal for individuals who are interested in serving the country, and also interested in receiving education. Then you have that dual role that the military serves.
Excellent. I know in my practice, health insurance business I've been in for almost 40 years, I always ask when I do meetings if there are any veterans in the room. First of all, my hat's always off to them for having put their lives and their families and everybody, at risk at some level. And I'm always impressed by the dedication that we have from our veterans. Let's talk about that a little bit. I know in Santa Cruz, 41st Avenue, we've got a small clinic, and I think it's an outpatient clinic, but then we also have Silas B. Hayes Hospital available to veterans, as I understand, and then also the VA Center in Palo Alto. My dad went there. He got priority, and I would have to say that is the best facility, as I understand, ranked in the country. They messed up a knee on the outside, and they went to the Veterans and Administration, and they made it right. And I remember we were sitting at before he passed, he was in a retirement center in Fremont, and for the most part, he says, "I'm not going to any place but the VA." And I'm like, "All right, I got it." And so he gave me a call, and they thought he had a brain issue. Hemorrhage, but it wasn't. I go to the emergency person, I go, "Who's going to make this decision?" They go, "Well, the head of our neurology department." I go, "Well, who might that be?" And they go, "Well, it's the head of the neurology department at Stanford." I'm like, wow. So that's what our veterans have. That's what they deserve around here, too. Some of the best care, I believe, in the country. Literally a hop, skip, and a jump from here. Maybe two hops and skips and jumps from where you're at, but for the most part, our veterans, I always encourage them to at least explore those options, what they have. They have great retirement centers for veterans as well. They've got some great benefits. My father-in-law was also a veteran. And I think that when people start to explore those benefits, they're going to be nicely surprised at what they find. Certainly, like any medical facility, there's been challenges. But again, we've got the best of the best for our veterans, and that excites me. Let's go back to, and we got about 10 minutes left, but the last 5 minutes, I want you to be able, if you can, Casey, to talk about 3 or 4 things you can sum up, so when people go to the polls that they'll remember you by. But not yet. I want to talk a little bit about your Navy experience, because that's where you served our country. In joining the Navy, let's talk a little bit about that experience, and why did you decide to go into the Navy?
Yes. Well, this was something that I guess I had a desire to do from a young age. It was funny because no one in my family served in the military. So for some reason, I always had this interest in the military and in government from a very young age. And when I went to college, I didn't mention this earlier when we were talking about, the accessibility and affordability of college, but I almost didn't go to college because we couldn't afford it. But my stepdad, Ernie, actually cashed in part of his retirement
Wow.
to help pay for that first year of college.
Amazing.
And it really is amazing because that gesture changed the entire course of my future, and all of these other opportunities and accomplishments that came after are a result of that. While I was in college, I actually had been reading and doing some studying for a senior class project about the CIA and about naval intelligence. And I just remember thinking, like, that sounds really cool. Maybe I'll do that someday. And then when I got out of college, I went to work for the Ohio House of Representatives in Ohio. And I really, again, just kind of had this urge, like, I need to be doing more. I want to travel. I want to get a master's degree. I want to serve the country. I wanted to do more, but I didn't know how. And so I literally called, I looked in the phone book. It was like the 1-800-GO-NAVY phone number. And I literally just called a recruiter and said, I think I want to join the Navy. And I remember reading something about naval intelligence, and that sounds cool. So, can I do this? And luckily, I got a great person who put me on the right path, and I went through officer candidate school and intelligence training. And my first job in the Navy was on an aircraft carrier, and we were deployed to the Middle East. This was before September 11th, but at that time, we were enforcing UN sanctions against Iraq. This was part of the Oil for Food program. And so here I was, probably 22, 23 years old, and involved in foreign affairs, involved in U.S. policy and enforcing UN sanctions against a country, and monitoring the shipping lanes and monitoring the oil tankers that were coming out of Iraq. And it was just amazing. It was a great opportunity. And those opportunities continued when I worked in Hawaii, and I was able to be involved in intelligence sharing with our allies in the Pacific. Again, just as a young person in my 20s, involved in really implementing U.S. foreign policy and really seeing how all of these different tools of national power come together to support our partners and our allies. And it was just an incredible opportunity. I loved every minute of it.
What a neat career. Sounds like you fell in love. That's great. Let me ask you a tough question, but I noticed that you're a Republican.
Yes.
The things that you're following are predominantly Democratic issues in terms of some of your beliefs and the things that you stand for. This is a partisan position you're running for, and I'm sure you've been asked this, so it won't be a surprise. How will you address those issues if you're in that position to do so? Because partisan generally does not mean you're going with your party, but how would you do that? How would you navigate that whole thing?
How would I address the social issues?
Yes. Exactly.
Yes. So, for anybody who's looked at my website, I have several issue papers there, and I'm pretty clear that I'm a moderate Republican, a practical Republican, and I am definitely more moderate or even liberal on social issues like abortion and gay marriage and climate change and things like that. So then people say to me, well, that's all great and you sound really reasonable, but once you get to Washington, you'll just vote with your party. And this is where I think it's particularly important to understand, how the system in Congress works, because there are actually different caucuses. And of course, there's the Republican caucus and the Democrats caucus. You may have heard of the Freedom Caucus. This is a group of very, very conservative Republicans who I don't think I would be invited to be a member of the Freedom Caucus. But there's also a Women's Caucus, and the Women's Caucus is made up of Republicans and Democrats. And interestingly enough, while women only make up 19% of the members of Congress, they actually pass 60% of the legislation.
So say that again?
Yeah, so women make up 19% of the members of Congress, but they pass 60% of the legislation. and it's bipartisan legislation. So the women from this women's caucus, they have a sponsor of legislation from one party, and then they have an agreement that they'll get a co-sponsor from the other party. So this is the most productive group and most cooperative group in Washington, D.C., and that's a group I'll be a member of.
Oh, okay, very good. Can you give us, now it's down to a minute, could you give us a minute summary of how you would like people to remember you at the polls?
Yes. Well, this is a very exciting year in this election, and obviously at the national level, there are all kinds of crazy things happening with, things that we didn't expect, I guess, in the national election. And so I think what I want voters to remember is this is a year to pay attention to what the candidates are saying. It's not a year to vote party line, because what Americans have realized is that the party agenda, the party line voting, isn't working for us. And we really have to pay attention to what the candidates are saying. And so I hope that the listeners will look at my website and watch the videos as you did and really pay attention in this cycle.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Wonderful interview. Casey Lucius, thank you. Tonight, again, I'd like to thank our volunteers. Community TV would not be Community TV without the volunteers that we have, and certainly guests like yourself, Casey. Very good evening, and I appreciate you coming up. We've had a lot of traffic here tonight, and you navigated it well. That's the first sign of a good potential legislator, without coming in and cussing. Thank you so much for your.
Thank you. It was great.
Yeah, your evening with us. David Goldman on camera. Thank you so much. Keith Grudger, our director. Gail Williamson, our cameras. Karen Scott is on graphics, and we had Lynn Dutton on audio. And as usual, this show is about our listening audience, our community members in Santa Cruz County. If you have an idea, call us, write us, and let us know. We will put guests on if you ask us to. Hopefully this evening was great. I think it's something that certainly is well timed when we talk about folks that are being potentially voted into office. We want to get their ideas, and we want to ask them the tough questions. And I think tonight we asked Casey some of the tough questions, and she navigated them well, well-spoken, and she knows her stuff. So I would like to, again, thank each and every one of you for being here this evening. And if we can do anything for you, again, Community TV is yours, Santa Cruz County. And thank you for watching, and please join us again. We will have another show tomorrow night with one of our candidates. And again, we thank you, Casey. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
We'll have you on again,
wonderful.
I'm sure. Yeah,
thank
good.
you very much. It was great.
Thank you for being here. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff.
Thank you. It's
We didn't
important
get-
stuff.
We didn't get